So now that you've read a little bit about mocks, let's start with the bank account program that we used in the last module. So suppose the program filters all the bank accounts where the balance is less than $100. In the real world, the bank accounts would come from a database, an external system. And you can see here we have a data access object, and this is the class that is responsible for getting the data from the database. We get all the bank accounts through this all method, and then we have the business rule, which is going through all the bank accounts returned, and if the balance is less than $100, we will put it in a separate list. Later, we will return the list. As a developer thinking about testing, you probably thought about exercising the if decision in the two possible ways, the true and false branch. You also thought about exercising the for loop and making sure that the program works when this loop is never executed, when it's executed one time or many more times. But when we start writing our unit tests, the tricky part is that this piece of code goes to the database. It uses the data access object there. And this means we have to just do some more work, right? So here's our test class. We need to set up the database in the test. So for this test, we have to create two bank accounts, one in which the balance is less than $100 and one where the balance is greater than $100. Then we need to save these into the database, and then we can do the test. We invoke the method under test, filter, and then make sure that it only returns one item, the first bank account. And then we should not forget to close the data access object, because otherwise we'd have a database connection open forever. So playing around with a real database is not our goal when testing this class. In fact, when I look at the data access object class, this will not even execute. I don't actually have a real database configured and running. So if we're going to be doing unit testing, we need to test this unit in an isolated way and test the business rule that is unique to this class. And if we are only testing the algorithm, we don't care about the database. The database is just something that returns us a list of bank accounts. So how can we get rid of the database for the sake of this test? The answer is to simulate the database. We create a class that looks like the class we want to simulate. But instead of doing complex tasks like going to the database, this simulation will just do simple fake things like returning a list of bank accounts that are in memory with no need for a database. And simulating a dependency can be quite interesting from the test automation perspective. Simulations are faster than real implementation. On the other hand, going to the database is quite slow, and we also have more control over the simulation. And some things are just too hard to do in practice. For example, how will you test whether the program behaves correctly when the database crashes? Just turn off the database and execute your tests? I don't think that's a good idea. So with simulation, we could just say, hey, crash, and then we can simulate the crash. This simulation in software testing is called a mock object. So when we say we're going to mock some object, we say we are going to create a simulation of a specific class just for the sake of testability. And you can see that in practice, we do apply mock objects in a lot of cases. For example, when we're dealing with an external system like a database or a web service or whatever other infrastructure you have. Or if you want to simulate exceptions that are hard to simulate in the real world. Or when we are dealing with third-party libraries and we don't have control and we need to simulate them. So how does it work? First, we have our production class. In this case, it's the bank account filter. And this bank account filter currently instantiates the data access object. Of course, this data access object goes to the database, and that's what we want to avoid. So instead of using the real data access object implementation we have, we will tell the bank account filter to use a simulation, the mocked object. However, mocks never know what to do unless you teach them. So we are responsible for setting the expected behavior of this mock or teaching what this mock needs to do when some of its methods are invoked. For example, in this particular test we are writing, we should teach the mock to return a list of 2 bank accounts when the method all is invoked. So this is the idea of a mock object. But how do we make our class under test use the mock? And how can we create mocks? And how do we teach the mock what to do? So in the next video, we will look at a mocking framework called Mockito.